Hello guys, welcome to another React.js tutorial for beginners. In this lesson, we're going to look at how we can use the Fetch API in React. On the screen is the items we are going to cover. We're going to see Fetch API and the useEffect, and then we look at the ways we can optimize that and the things to look out for when you are making use of Fetch API useEffect combination. And finally, we look at how we can improve our code using a custom hook so that our codes are reusable. What I have is a brand new React project which I created using the Create React app. Create React app, npx create React app. You can give it whatever name you prefer. That will create your project. For the Fetch API, we are going to use the JSON placeholder because our Fetch API is going to make HTTP request to some API endpoint. In that case, we are going to make use of this JSON placeholder, which is a website that provides us with some dummy RESTful endpoints we can interact with. For example, we can interact with the post, resource, comment, add-on, etc. Right? So this, actually, I wanted to open one of these. For example, if I open the post, just array of post objects. So this is what we're going to make use of. To get started, I will go to app.js. Right now, I don't have my app running. To start the app, of course, npm start. That will start the app. It's starting. And now that is started. The first thing I want to do is to remove these items inside here, inside the header. Let me just put h1 there that says posts, because we are going to interact with the post endpoint. All right, so our first task is this: the Fetch API and useEffect. The reason I want to use the useEffect hook is that I want to show the posts when this component renders, right? So when we get to that page, the user should be able to see the list of posts. For that, we can say use effect. So with the empty array as second argument to the useEffect hook, this useEffect is going to run only once when the component is mounted. Then inside here we can say fetch. I will copy the URL to the post endpoint, but instead of getting all the posts, we can filter by the user ID, this user ID field. So I will copy that URL and head over here, paste the URL. So this will give us only the post for the user ID 1. Using the promise syntax, what we can do here is set.then. We get a response. Then we transform that response to JSON. Response.json. And in the next line, we have that response as JSON data. So what do we do with the data? Let's create a state variable here. So let's call this post set post is equal to use state. Initially we don't have any post, so empty array of posts. Then when we get that post, we say set post and set post response, and in case of any error we cache that. For now, let's just do console.log, then the error. Let's go ahead and make use of the posts. This post we have here. So down here I can say post.map post, that is the individual post. Here we can have anchor post.title, and we give this some key post.id. Save that and we go back to the page, so we have the posts, the list of posts. Let me remove the center alignment of the text. So come over here. I think this should be it. No. Text align center. Okay. Before we talk about things to watch out for, let's rewrite this, what we have here, using a different syntax. That is the async await syntax. This syntax is called the promise syntax. Promise.then, whatever. So we can actually, let's remove this. Let me copy the URL because I'm going to reuse that URL. So what I can do here is say const, I will create a function called getPost async. This function will take URL, so we can call it and pass URL that we want to fetch instead of hard coding the URL. Then we say const response to be equal to await fetch. We pass that URL. Actually, we pass our dynamic URL. On the next line, we say const response data to be await response.json. Just like before, we transform that data to JSON format. Then down here we can say set post response data. And to get that, to see that in action, we just call the function pass this URL. When we go back to the page, we get the same result. Nothing has changed so far from what we had earlier. Okay. The first thing about improvement and things to watch out for. This first one is not really about the fetch API. Instead, it is about the use state. So when we update the state here, for example, when we called set post, this post data is not immediately available, right? So if we say console.log post, save that, and we head over to the browser. Let me inspect the page, go to the console, refresh this. So you can see that what we have is an empty array at this line. So when we call set post, due to the way this use state works internally, that data is not immediately available on the next line or inside this useEffect hook. But of course, when it is available, we can access it like here. So this is one thing to take note of. And then the next thing we can do is to, before we try to make use of the data that is returned, let's be sure that the response was okay. We can do that with response.ok. Response.ok returns Boolean when the response status code is within the 200 range. That is, for example, 200, 201, etc. So what we can do is to, if it is okay, this is what we have now. But what we're interested in is if not okay, then we can maybe throw an exception, throw an error, throw new error, something went wrong, error status response dot status. I will save that. If we go to the browser, nothing changes because there is no error. But let's just deliberately throw that error, refresh this page, everything goes blank. The reason this happened is because there has been an error. If I check the console, you can see that we have error. Okay, so that brings us to the next question. We just have blank page when there was an error, but that is bad user experience. The least we can do is to inform the user that something has gone wrong. How we can do that is oftentimes you see try catch when using the fetch API. So we can surround that fetch call with a try catch, right? If there's an error thrown or if something went wrong, whether it is this line or anywhere else, we during the fetch process, if something went wrong, we can at least set a message that we show to the user. So let's have error, set error to be equal to use state initially no error. So we can put no there. Then down here we can set error. Let's say something went wrong. You can do better error handling, maybe show a different message if you want to, right? Then to see that in action, we can come down here and say if we have an error, then show that error. All right, if we go back, nothing will be shown because there's no error. Let's simulate that error again this time, and we get something went wrong. Now this is better user experience. Then another thing is you notice that let me go back so that you notice that. Then I'll introduce the error and go back to the page. You notice that something went wrong when we try to fetch some posts, but we still have the old record here. So what we can do is let's just set it to empty array before we call the fetch API again. Now inside here I can say set post back to empty array, right? Before we make another request. Okay. Another thing we can do is when these posts are being loaded, we need to tell the user that something is going on. So in case the server takes time to respond, the user will not be confused and wonder, okay, what's going on here? I'm not seeing anything on the screen. So what we can do is to come up here and we say const loading, set loading to be equal to use state once again, initially false. Initially we say we are not loading anything. Then when we are loading, about to start the loading, we set the loading to true. And then I'm going to do something here which I'm going to refactor in a moment. Let's say we have gotten the post, we set the post, we can then set loading to false, right? And come here. Okay, we are not displaying anything regarding the loading, so let's just come here and say loading and show something h3 loading. Then refresh the page. You can see loading like half a second, but it is there. So it is working, but setting it to false here is not really the best way to do it, so to speak. Because for example, if we have an error in the process, the loading is not going to get cancelled, we just get the thing stuck there. You can say let's just repeat the thing, because when there's an error, let me leave that in there. We can come down here inside the cache block and cancel it. Yeah, in this case that will work, but there's a better way we can actually do that. What we can do is to go into the finally block, finally, and cancel that loading. So here we are guaranteed that this is going to get cancelled because the finally block will run no matter what happens here or here. So we get better result, right? Right, that is another improvement to our fetch and our use effect. The next thing we want to do is let's look at this second argument, the dependencies array. Right now, like I think I mentioned before, this effect is going to run only once because there's nothing that changes that we have passed to this dependency array. What we can do is, instead of hard coding the user ID of the post that we want to fetch, we can make the user ID dynamic. So I will remove that user ID and I'm going to create a variable called user ID. For that, I will make use of the state one more time. Const user ID. We say set user ID to be equal to use state. I will pass one, that is user ID 1 initially, because I know that this has those IDs, user ID 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Then we can come here and pass the user ID. That what will happen is that whenever the user ID changes, the effect will run again. Okay. To demonstrate that change, we can come here and use some hard-coded user IDs because we know that they exist in that JSON placeholder resource. So array.map, let's call that ID. We can say, let me have a paragraph here and user ID and then the ID. Then we give this a unique key of ID. And then we are going to tell what happens when each of those items is clicked. So if I go back here, that doesn't look so good. Can we use button there? Let me change it to button. So where is it? Oh, I was looking at post. So here I'm going to change this to button and here button. Now that's better. What we want to do is when we click any of these buttons, we want to do something. So on click, you have to do something, set user ID to be the current ID. Alright, so what will happen is that when we click any of the button, it's going to set the user ID, for example, 2 or 3 or 1, and because of that change, if there's a change, because if we click the same button, there will be no change in the user ID. Because of that change, the effect is going to run again, right? So for example, click on this, we take note of what is here. Click on ID 3, we get something else. Click on 1, we get something else. But click 1 multiple times, nothing happens because there's no change in user ID. So our code is a little bit reusable and smarter now. That is another improvement so far. And then comes something a bit tricky. Sometimes you might have seen that warning on the console about potential memory leak or something, right? So this is not about Fetch API. It's actually about useEffect and what we call cleanup function. When we have an asynchronous operation like this, an asynchronous operation, that is something that happens in the future in computer world. That future can be milliseconds, right? So when we have such an operation, we want to be sure that before we call any of the state function to update the state, that the component is not unmounted. There are different approaches to achieve that. One of the ways you can do that is let's have a variable called mounted that is initially true because the component is mounted. And then down here we have what is called cleanup function. Just return a function. That's basically what it is. Then inside that function you can perform whatever cleanup action that you want to perform. For example, we can set mounted to false. With that, before we update the state, we can check if the component is mounted. So for example, we can come inside it and say if not mounted, then don't do anything. We can maybe return, right? We can repeat the same thing down, but no need for that. Let's just repeat because I'm gonna use that for the next thing. So if the component is mounted, if the component is not mounted, we return. To see that this actually works, let's just do console.log clean up, just to put that in the console. Then I will open the console and refresh this, go to info. You can see that the cleanup runs. When I click any of this, the cleanup function is running. Okay, that is for that. But that's another improvement or something to watch out for. But you can see that we have these repetitions, checking mounted, etc. There's a different way we can achieve similar results using what is called abort controller. So for that, I'm going to let me remove these occurrences of mounted. Okay, save that. So alert controller is another way we can achieve this. For that, I'm going to come here and say const alert controller is equal to new alert. Come on, I keep saying alert. Abort controller. Abort controller. Okay, I've not used this very often, so I guess that's why the mistakes. So abort controller is basically something we can pass this to this fetch API as the second argument object, one of the properties of this second argument object. So the property we are interested in is called signal. Whenever we signal the fetch API, it's going to terminate the request that is ongoing. For example, at the cleanup function, we are going to signal this fetch API using the abort controller, and whatever that is going on will be terminated, right? And this is a property we can use to achieve that with abort controller. Then in our cleanup function, I still have mounted here. We can say abort controller dot abort. So this will give us similar effect to what we had before using the mounted variable. If I go back here and I think I got an error. Okay, it's we have the post, we have the buttons, but we are getting this something went wrong. Why is that happening? This is happening because of calling abort here, right? So it means that in our error handling, we need to be sure that that error is not because of this function, this abort call here. So for example, what we can do is if abort controller dot signal dot aborted, we just return. We know that this is not an actual error. It's just because of this abort controller we are using. Okay, so I'll refresh this and you see that the error goes away. I will click and everything still works as before. So this is not a new improvement, just an alternative way to what we had before using the mounted. Let's take a look at the next item we have not touched from our to-do. We said we are going to make our code reusable using a custom hook. So why that can be useful is, for example, let's say we have another component where we want to make another fish, another request using this our fetch API. Instead of repeating everything we have done here, we can actually make a custom hook that we can easily use. And to make a custom hook is, at least for what we are trying to achieve, is not so hard. What I will do is, let me create a file called useFetch.js actually. This is JavaScript. What I will do is to copy everything we have from here down to the useEffect and move it over to useFetch. Then make sure to import those things. useEffect. Make sure to import those. Let me minimize this. I thought I've imported useState. Okay, I have those imported. I don't know why I'm getting an error. Oh, they need to be inside. I need a function here. So everything should go inside a function that we are going to call. Let's call that const, or just function. Use fetch, not use fat. Use fetch is the function, and inside here our code goes into it. Here we are not going to make use of the user ID, so remove that user ID part. Instead, our useFetch is going to take URL that will be passed to it. And down here, we call that URL. Then for the dependency array, when the URL changes, the effect should run again, right? And finally, we are going to return an object that we have loading error, and it is called post here, but let's call it something generic, something that is, that's something that makes sense because we are not going to use this only for post endpoint. So we can call that data, and we call it set data. Set data. Now that makes more sense. And down here we can return data. Our custom hook looks complete. The final thing is to export default use fetch. Come on, use fetch, not use effect. Use fetch. So our hook is named, starts with the use. That's how you start the name of the custom hook. You can see the file name here, and then the function name. So just follow the convention. And over here, we can just remove everything we have here. Actually, everything we have there, we can remove it because we don't need it anymore. We are going to make use of the custom hook that we just created. Remove that as well. Let's import the custom hook. We can say const uh, to be equal to use fetch. Now use fetch expects us to pass the URL. Let me copy that URL one more time. We got it from here, and this is expecting the URL that we are going to make dynamic. So bring it down here, pass the user ID. Okay, from here we can grab the loading, error, and data. But this data, we can give it an alias. We can give it the name posts. This is how you can do that, right? All the errors go away. And if we go to the page, I expect that we still get the post using our custom hook. Why this custom hook is so useful is that we can pass different URL there and everything still works fine. For example, copy this URL and pass here, paste that, save. Of course, we are not going to get posts, but we are going to get the data. So what I can do is come here and use effect. Whenever the post changes, we are going to, it is called post, but don't worry, even if it is not post, whenever that data changes, we just output the value here. Go back here and refresh the page. I think whatever it is that we fetched has title as well. What is that? Albums. Okay, coincidentally, that's why everything is still working fine here, but now there are much more data. So there's no need to inspect because we can see the result already being displayed here. So this, our custom hooks, works. Of course, this is just a simple implementation. There are many things that are not accounted for. For example, if this were to be a post request, then our use fetch a custom hook is not going to work. That is if down here the method is post. It therefore means that we need to come here and maybe pass another parameter for configuration. That is the options. That's second. So that can be an object that we pass here, right? And then merge our signal stuff. But we are not trying to build something complete. This is just for our little demonstration. All right, so over here we don't need this guy anymore. I just wanted to display output with that. Okay guys, this is the end of the lesson. I hope one or two things here makes sense. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't done so. Until next time, thank you.